P.J. O'Rourke said, giving this type of power to politicians is like giving whiskey and car keys to teenagers. I mean, they can't help themselves. Look at all the money that's in Social Security. We're going to break it open and use it for something else. We need to spend now.
If you and I did that as a business owner, we go
to jail.
The mindset of fear, sacrifice, and scarcity has been tried, and it has failed. It's time to shrug the idea of sacrifice, embrace value creation and abundance, and enhance your quality of life today while building wealth along the way. Welcome to Sacrifice Shrugged of the Wealth Labs podcast, where you can turn your thoughts into profits and build the life you love. Look, Pat, this topic I think is essential because there's a certain lowest common denominator that people are starting to gravitate towards, saying, that may be the way it is, but people won't do it. I think that we've got to a point where responsibility is becoming, void. It's becoming, okay, yeah, that may be how it is, but, will people do that? I hear that all the time. And so we're going to, basically throw out economics, accountability. We're going to say, well, this is what one person that might be the exception, or maybe even the masses. So let's go ahead and make sure that everyone only hears that. And so what it's doing is it's actually treating people like they're stupid, which I find offensive. It's making it where people are now governed by emotion rather than philosophy. So they're not acting in their own best interest. And I see in the world today, people just point out problems instead of create solutions. People are more apt to say what they don't like rather than to find what they truly like and what they want. And I kind of see it like as an epidemic, if that's not overkill in what I'm saying there.
This is a deep philosophical issue, right? There is a growing trend that is disturbing.
Right.
I want to try to not sound like this is a political or a partisan conversation, because this is not politics. What we're talking about right here is the branch of philosophy that precedes politics, which is ethics, right? And so let's talk about how to behave individually. I want to remain apolitical, in the sense of, there's a bunch of political rhetoric. As soon as you try to comment on one thing versus another, what people automatically are looking to do now is to put you in some kind of a camp.
Right.
And so maybe just to be clear, I don't identify Republican or Democrat. I'm apolitical. Right. I'm libertarian in that. So both of those sides would hate me in a sense because they like to hate. Sorry. So the idea that the ideas we want to talk about are not politically driven ideas. Your politics would be an outcome once you draw conclusions to these areas, but it's a matter of thinking about them enough. But what you're speaking to in large part are a couple of things. Number one, the idea of self-responsibility and what role that plays in the life of an individual.
It's required for freedom. People are giving that up all the time due to fear.
Well, that's the whole thing. Like, hey, are you willing to give up your freedom so that so you can have somebody else take care of you and you don't have to take responsibility?
Right.
And then the second, which we know doesn't work. I just watched on the plane flying in last night a documentary. I think it was called Meeting Gorbachev, and I was riveted for the 90 minutes. Even though I being in the business of creating docuseries, I rarely felt like it could have been much more and done a lot better. But nonetheless, I grew up in that era, seeing Gorbachev and listening to what happened and from his point of view through his lens, because I was looking at the lens of the heroic actions of Reagan and then Gorbachev meeting and the fame, all what unfolded and how the Cold War ended. And what was going on in Russia at the time, which was on the verge of economic collapse. And quite frankly, Russia couldn't stand, or it wasn't even Russia, it was the Soviet Union, couldn't stand the economic demands of an arms race. Their people were starving. They were in a really compromised position. And Gorbachev was a phenomenal actor in that era, of history, who had a different vision and kind of broke with the party line and et cetera. But in the end, as you look at how these things play out, because now we're back in almost talking about politics. What is the political environment of a communist country versus what some people might want to call a socialist country, as if they're different things. They're just really different in degree. as compared to maybe more of a free market capitalist society, which really doesn't exist anywhere in the world right now.
Right.
And then the mixed economies, which you say, we're kind of capitalist, we're kind of socialist, we're kind of this, we're kind of that, which is very confusing, where no principles abide in general. So when you look at how these things play out on a macro scale to the varying cultures in which they exist, there's a lot of historical precedent to basically say, okay, this is a grand abstract idea. What happened when you put it into the world and had people try to live by it? And there's just really no argument that taking individual responsibility away from people, which means then you have to take individual rights away from people, and you have to have people who basically want to control everything for the good of the greater populace. That doesn't work. I mean, it's a misguided idea. And then, conversely, what happens when people have self-responsibility, et cetera. So now if we're down to the individual and what you're talking about, there's really one or two questions somebody has to ask themselves. Who's going to take care of me? Or I need to take care of me or my family, et cetera. I need to step up and take responsibility.
Right, and I think we have to shift from competition to collaboration.
Collaboration
is key.
As long as it's voluntary.
Right. And as soon as it's mandated, it's no longer collaboration. You're like this whole notion of someone knows better for me than I do. Even if it were true, even if someone did, am I willing to give up my personal, liberties and my personal freedom? Because part of living is we actually learn from mistakes. We go out there and I think that the only time people are willing to give that up is either A, they feel so isolated, they feel too alone, they feel like it's too complicated, and because of that fear, they say, I just don't want to end up in a bad situation, and so they're willing to give up everything that they are. And when has that ever worked?
Well, now you just started to speak to the second piece of what you brought up in your introductory comments, which is how did they feel, right? So now it's basically saying the framework of an ethics, a code of values, and then how do you feel as a byproduct of these values when you're trying to live in the world, and where I think we are in big trouble is when we start taking people's feelings. Not that feelings are important. I think compassion is, the Dalai Lama said, paraphrasing, these aren't really optional. I mean, these are necessary for us to exist as human beings on this planet in a culture and society. Love and compassion are necessary elements. But when suddenly an individual or people's feelings become the primary driver of how other people need to behave, it's almost like, because you have hurt feelings, I'm not entitled to my feelings, and then that creates resentment, and we can get into all the psychodynamics. Right. But ultimately, all these things fuse together, which people understand. When you have a philosophy, which means you have certain values, and then from these values, when things are occurring, you have certain feelings. And if you're just going to try to make everybody feel good all the time, it's an impossible task. So you have to give everybody the right to their own individual feelings, just like they have the right to their own individual responsibility. Right. And not, as long as I'm not treading on your rights as an individual, then I shouldn't be held to some sort of social recriminations as a byproduct of I made you feel bad because I thought or said a certain thing.
Well, let's look at it in the world of financial planning, because that's a lot of my background. I saw someone speak recently that you saw speak even before that, and their entire premise was, look, you don't know anything about finance. I need to be at the center of your plan. Mm-hmm. And you just trust me and hand everything over to me. As soon as you think someone's going to care more about your money than you do, you're in trouble.
I've been in that trouble.
Right.
I get it.
And look, I get it. It's been sold as complexity. But I always think, well, it's not like if I were, if I had a newborn right now and I needed to go somewhere for a day and I needed someone to watch that newborn, I wouldn't give it to Wall Street. You come back, they'd be like, oh, we lost 7% of your newborn, no more toes. I mean, like we know intuitively that hasn't worked out, yet because we're not willing to take personal responsibility because we don't have time, we're busy, it's complicated, and we get sold that that's the way, we just hand it over. And in handing it over, there's a 95% failure rate. 95% failure rate. we're not going to get on an airplane that fails 95% of the time, but somehow we're going to try to take lift off with our finances under that same premise. And it's because of the narrative. It's because of the lens. I love that you use the word lens. It's the perspective,
Right.
right? Our perspective determines our action.
Right.
And when our perspective comes from scarcity, that there's lack, limit, that there's fear, doubt, worry, that there's entitlement, that there's any of that, then what we're going to have is very destructive results. And so as I put a video out there on YouTube, for example, I get all these comments where people didn't even watch the whole thing, or if they did, they didn't listen. It just doesn't relate to their existing lens of where their emotion was. And all they're trying to do is say why what they're doing is right. When a lot of it, I don't have a dog in the fight. Like, I don't care whether a 15-year mortgage is right or a 30-year mortgage or an interest only or a mortgage or no mortgage. I just want to say, here's the economics behind it. And once you understand that, then you can make better choices. Now, those choices need to look at your personal economy, which is your peace of mind and how you feel as an individual, but it also should take into consideration the economic ramifications and impact, because otherwise it's easy to be manipulated to do something that's not in your best interest because someone else wants your cash quicker. I mean, you look at these notions that people believe, like high risk equals high return. The people that say that don't take risk. They have you take risk while they make money.
Right.
Or it takes money to make money. Doesn't take their money to make money. It takes your money to make money.
Right.
Or accumulate for 30 years and get compound interest. They're not trying to compound their interest. They're trying to increase their cash flow. So, like, I get it. Before 2005, I had complete bias because I got paid commissions. And
which is the fundamental nature. You have to look at, what are incentives, and how do they motivate? And in capitalism, that's when the most important things to understand is the profit motive and the virtue of it. But at the same time, you got to go eyes wide open because, listen, nothing is perfect in this universe, meaning that corruption, fraud, or maybe, how can I put it, non-aligned incentives could be wrong. And there's confirmation bias is inescapable.
And how many financial planners say that they're not biased? I have biases.
It's impossible.
Right?
This is the whole thing. When it comes, I'll say one thing. I think one of the more useful, at least for me, Einstein quotes was where he said, "Make things as simple as possible, but not simpler." So when people are trying to oversimplify financial planning, it's like you can't. You want to make it as simple as possible, but if you oversimplify it, it starts to become something that's counterproductive. What you're talking about here, you got to get to certain levels of understanding. But one of the things, what I thought I was having recently was saying, confirmation bias is unavoidable. When I applied to financial planning as a construct, this is where I feel like, working with you, and I'm not here to plug you. I'm here because we're having this conversation. But this is a part of, I think, some of the genius in your model, is that it's not you alone saying, here's what you need to do, and you're the consultant. You have an accredited network of people,
right?
All of whom, each one has their own bias, and they need to. The antidote to confirmation bias of a single person is having multiple people contribute their biases, and then in the end, now you have a sum result saying that the biases are now sort of canceling each other out, and what starts to emerge is a plan that's appropriate.
Right, and one thing that I think is so harmful is if you say, where should I invest my money? And I tell you, it's not a right investment for you because you had to ask the question first and foremost, and it might be right for me, but I'm different than you.
That's right.
We have different strengths. Your level of knowledge in the health field is far deeper than mine is. Right? So if I'm trying to tell you to invest in something there, I couldn't know what you know.
Right.
And there's a lot of people that chase returns without a premise, and profit is always elusive.
Right.
So people chase returns without a premise, and profit will be elusive because now they're just going after, this is what's being talked about. We look at the meteoric rise of Bitcoin. It was a lot of that happened when there was just so much fear of missing out when it was online. Right?
Yep.
I'm not saying it's not here to stay. I'm just saying that why did it jump so quickly? Well, it's because it's all you heard about. It's what everybody's talking about. People were feeling like they were missing out. And all of a sudden, emotion governed over intellect.
One of the things that I still marvel at, and having interviewed so many people through some of our series. Like
you did the Money Revealed series. So,
and we're in the middle of Wealth Breakthroughs right now, is the people who talk about the market. the common thing that they all relate to is the psychology of the market. What everybody knows is that emotion is guiding the market, that people trade off of headlines when there's an overreaction in the market. And I'm thinking to myself, these are brilliant academic, scholastic people who are basically the prime movers in these markets, who are taking their bets, making their positions, doing the analysis. They're doing technical analysis. They're looking at fundamentals. They're doing all the stuff. And in the end, there's still this impact of human psychology on the entire thing.
Right.
Which is, to me, it's mind-boggling in a way that is fascinating, where now you're starting to see that there's sort of these confirmation biases. Like, because the raw...
Because value is perspective. That's it. Yes, it boils down to perspective.
The raw analytics, shouldn't leave much to interpretation, but somehow there's a psychology, this sort of X factor that comes in and makes shifts and moves that need time to process and correct. Just like if you got very angry right now, you'd need some time to process and correct it. Well, the market has the same kind of a thing. It's a very human and alive thing. So what does that mean in the end? It's what you said, is that there's no purely didactic way. You need a lot of data points to understand an individual, or what you call investor DNA, which I love that term, saying, everybody's your own individual thing. How is it that you can have multiple people that take multiple approaches, and they can all end up, in a good position from a wealth perspective, or a bad one, when they're also different? It's not formulaic in the sense of, like you were saying, okay, here it is. Here's the formula. Plug everybody into the formula. They're all going to get different results.
Right. It's like if I'm a 401k salesman, and that's how I make my living. Guess what people are going to hear about? A 401k, but they might have really high interest rate loans. They might not have enough liquidity and safety, and nobody's getting paid a commission on that, so no one's hearing enough about it. Mm-hmm. They may need to fund something inside of their business, but they're pulling money out of that business to fund a 401k because they feel guilt and shame if they don't fund it early and often. And then they have no exit strategy of how they get to it, because there's taxation, there's penalties, and they might not even know what the fees are inside of it because they're so-called too busy. So this is the epidemic that we're facing, is that people aren't looking at it. And here's my main point. If you don't have a philosophy, mm-hmm. someone else is going to sell you theirs.
And you just said it. If you're a 401k salesman, you have a confirmation bias. In other words, when you start to present to me why I should invest in 401ks, et cetera, you're going to take use cases and say, let me give you an example of Mary Jones or Dr. Smith, and they put in, this much money into a 401k over this period of time. This was their rate of return. This is in the, blah, blah, blah. You're gonna look for the use cases that confirm that this is the right thing to do. And I'm not saying that there's any malice or malfeasance. Right. They just believe it. I
didn't like the discovery that there were problems with it.
Yeah.
I had my own money in a 401k. At the time, I worked for a firm that was matching that 401k, and I could make a lot of money selling 401ks. So when I figured out that there were issues, and I boiled it down to 15 issues that weren't being covered or discussed, it didn't sit well with me. Because I now had to go tell people.
Right, but it takes usually some type of a seismic event to disrupt your thinking patterns, to then say, oh, maybe I've been sort of blind here, willfully blind.
Well, let's look at the agenda behind them. Yeah. I mean, is there a place for them? Yes. Is it where most people are doing this? No. So imagine this. Imagine you're a financial institution. Mm-hmm. What do you want from people? Their money, obviously. How often?
As often as they can get.
How long do you want to hold on to it for?
Forever.
And how much do you want to give someone back when they want to withdraw?
As little as possible.
Okay, so these plans are brilliant for that, because when you put money in it and someone tells you have tax savings, it's not in your pocket. That money is in the plan.
Yeah.
And it's deferred and still has to be paid one day. Some people are like, yeah, but it's going to grow to more. As it grows to more, your taxes will increase too, just like when your income goes up. So imagine you're the institution. Not only are you taking fees on your deposit, you actually get to take fees on the money that's owed to the government.
That's right.
And if you want your money out early, well, there could be penalties. So, and most people, it's automatically coming out. And here's where I think it's demonstrative to society. If someone's an employee, the majority of the time when they go get a job, they're automatically enrolled and have to opt out. So their money is going into a plan that they don't know anything about the stocks that are inside of it. And even if they get a little bit of education on it, come on, I'm fairly savvy in this. I could never tell you about 100 different companies in an exchange-traded fund or a mutual fund because there's too much going on in the boardroom. I own 3 businesses. It's hard to keep up with what everything that's happening in those.
And you're inside it.
And I'm inside it.
So, this traces all the way back to what you were saying in the very beginning about self-responsibility. There is a top-down arrogance around retirement accounts. And look at the absurdity. First, the wisdom of the government who thinks that people are too stupid to self-govern or to take care of their own finances and take responsibility say we have to create a retirement system that is a safety net because people are going to spend wantonly their entire life, and then they're going to get to the end of their life and they're not going to have any money. What are we going to do? We're going to have to take care of them. Let's force them to save, and they create Social Security. Then, of course, it's like
which built at a time when people died pretty early. So we had the finances to handle it.
Well, yes, and of course it's predicated on certain premises, a ever-growing workforce that right. And then secondly, it was for some period of time lockboxed. I mean, hey, we can't mess with this money, but it's like
there's $0 in it right now.
It's
$0. The second it enters the account, Congress borrows the money immediately and has an IOU. There's no cash in it. Zero.
This is the. I literally start to feel like such an anger and disdain when I think about this. So now they take the money from you. I mean, you don't have an option saying, "Hey, I'd like to invest in this retirement plan." I am forced through tax and payroll tax. I'm forced to put this in, and my employer's forced, to help. I mean, they're literally appropriating the money, and they say, okay, at least it's lockbox. I remember when people went crazy because George W. Bush talked about, and he said it clearly. He said, this is your money, not the government's money. You should be able to put it in your own plans. Listen, if we're going to force you to save.
But then people said, people wouldn't do that. They'll just spend it. Right, they will. But it was their money. Once again, are we going to make choices for them?
Well, this is the arrogance now of that particular philosophy. I'm not going to call it that political party. Both parties are complicit in this, right? I mean, it's just a matter of degree one way or the other. But but Bush said, "Hey, that's your money," and then and you should direct where it goes. Still wants to force it out of there. But okay, the overarching theme is people are too stupid to manage their own affairs, so we need a government that's going to manage it for them.
And if that's the philosophy, guess what we propagate onto them?
But we
keep them.
Yes, of course they're dependent. Lower. But it's worse than that. Because it'd be one thing to say, okay, hey, you know what? The government's collected all this money. They've lockboxed it, and it's there for the people when they retire to dole out. Then one day they decide that we need money. It's who is it? PJ O'Rourke said, giving this type of power to politicians is like giving whiskey and car keys to teenagers. I mean, they can't help themselves. Look at all the money that's in Social Security. We're going to break it open and use it for something else. We need to spend now.
If you and I did that as a business owner, we go to jail.
As a matter of fact, business owners are put in jail if they take payroll taxes and spend it on other things when they're supposed to give it to the government.
Well, and this is where I get disgusted with politicians. I obviously am for lowering taxes, but my problem with them even saying that and pandering is they're $23 trillion in debt. And it'd be like you and I having a business that's not profitable enough to pay for our loans, and we say, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to lower our profits.
Right. It's
like, okay, well, then the loan's going to get bigger if we lower our profits.
My intellectual mentor, Nathaniel Brandon, said it this way, which was right. He said, businesses or business people, entrepreneurs, are accountable to reality. Politicians are accountable to good intentions. If you take what our politicians are doing and you translate that into the private sector, they're all bankrupt very, very quickly.
Right.
And so you and I are accountable to reality every day. And so accountable to reality, again, if there's certain things that we do that would be comparable to what they're doing, we would go to jail.
Right.
But they can say, oh, well, we had good intentions. We just didn't get it right. And then
and they'll not even do that. They'll just blame someone else.
Always going to point the finger and say they're going to blame someone else.
Well, we had it this way. I always think of Social Security like I think of the show Dumb and Dumber. So, like, they have the briefcase, it cracks open. There's all the cash in it. They spend all the cash.
Right.
But they make sure to write IOUs. And one of those IOUs falls out, and one of the guys, Jeff Daniels or Jim Carrey, pick it up. He goes, oh, that's a Lamborghini. You're going to want to hold on to that one. Like, they have no more ability to pay back that IOU than the government does.
No. What you mean, the government doesn't have anything except for the workforce that they tax.
Right.
I mean, when you look at what is the value of fiat currency, here's a dollar. It's an IOU.
Right, it's an IOU.
And basically, why would people trust that I would take that dollar in exchange for a good or service is because you've got the world's most powerful workforce, the world's most powerful militia, and a government that has control over it saying we can enforce taxes. And unfortunately, we're still the tallest pygmy. In other words, when anybody anywhere else in the world starts to accumulate any big wealth, where do you think they're sending it? Why do you think interest rates are still so low? And why did they sometimes break the buck where people say, I'm going to put $1 billion here and you're going to give me back $1 billion, less than $1 billion. Why would I do that?
Which is insane.
Which is insane because
they have more faith in our currency.
I'm paying you to make sure that I'm going to get some of this back.
I have purchasing power. Yeah, they're not in Zimbabwe where you could get $1 trillion note that couldn't buy anything.
Yeah, so we are still the tallest pygmy in that respect, but it doesn't mean that we're good or we're right. And when you start to really look at the fundamental nature of all of it, the practical side of it is, like you're saying, we have debt that is just beyond comprehension. We have people a populace now who's just going to trust that the government's somehow going to take care of them. And the government has shown no vigilance or even capability in doing so.
Right, and Social Security, another part of why it's so destructive is because it gives some people a false sense of security that they're going to have something there. I tell people, I'm like, don't count on that at all. And they're like, but I put money into it. I'm like, you're part of the problem as soon as you feel that way. Yeah. As soon as you think, but I'm owed that because I put money into it, the money isn't there.
Look at it like any other tax. It's gone. It's
gone.
Never coming back,
right.
And it's going to evaporate on stupid shit.
But this is the solution. Is we've got to look at our personal economy and our personal philosophy, because the global economy is complicated. Politics is beyond belief. I don't know what they're talking about behind doors. I don't know what deals are being made. I don't know what they're sliding into a bill. I'm not reading all of them. They're not reading all of them. So what I can do is look today and say, what does prosperity mean to me? What does value creation mean? How do I develop who I am? How do I bring that to the world? And how do I continue to create my own standards instead of become part of the collective that continues to deviate towards a lower mean, that continues to say people can't do this, people can't do that. People can do a lot more than we give them credit for. But if we continue to label them as incapable and required to give up who they are in order to be safe, then that's where we lose. So I look at my personal economy every day instead of the global economy. I actually don't watch the news anymore or read much that way. I just simply go, where can I innovate? Where can I create? Where do I add value? What is the best I have to bring to the world? And I continue to invest in that. So I'm not just pointing out problems. We're pointing out the problem today because we have to understand why we got to this point. And then we can come up with the solution based upon philosophy. And most people discount philosophy like somehow that's not important.
Well, yeah, the people who do that don't understand philosophy. The reality is that everybody's got a philosophy. And it's driving their choices, actions, and results every moment of their life. The only question is, have they defined it?
It's the container in which they operate and live. It's more critical than anything else, yet it's discounted.
And for most people, it's an invisible container. They don't understand it.
It's how they believe reality works.
And and listen, there's a lot of considerations, and everything's not doom and gloom. I think there's a lot of injustice, but it's not doom and gloom. There's still an extraordinary amount of wealth in the world. Also, the X factor is technology. Technology is multiplying how productive, how much value creation an individual can put into the world. Just not even that long ago, go back to the 80s, 70s, what an individual is capable of producing or value create is very, very minimal compared to what's possible now through technology. So there's no doubt that the wealth of the world is expanding. But now we have all these conversations in the context of that. What does this mean as far as how we should govern, how we should tax, how we should take care of people, or how much self-responsibility there should be? So there's a lot of deep and very complicated questions here, but I'm only asking the questions because if somebody's bothering to listen to this conversation, it means that they want to think about their life a little bit.
Right.
And in thinking about your life, one of the most important dimensions of your life is your finances. And if you don't give consideration to these issues, then you're not going deep enough. You're oversimplifying, and then you're making yourself vulnerable to some pretty bad stuff.
It's time to shrug sacrifice and instead embrace love, embrace life, and really go out there and have quality of life at the forefront so you can live the best life and who you actually are.